Well, guys, welcome back to Decoding Babylon. It's been a while. I don't even know if the last time Bryan and I talked, well, the last time I saw Bryan's face, I was seeing him in Las Vegas, Nevada, in person. It was literally the first time Bryan and I met, and we're back together in studio. A little different look.
Yeah, we're the more common way that we see each other. But hey,
Right, thousands of miles away. But today we have an interesting topic.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are fascinated with this topic: giant trees, ancient
Mhm.
trees. Are these mountains that are very curious looking, that look an awful lot like tree stumps. Are they giant tree stumps? And if they are tree stumps, how big were those trees?
And they also have what seems to be resemblance of cell structure and even pathways. Like I believe there's one of those giant trees actually. I don't know if it's in India that has a river that goes from underneath the ground and it goes up through the tree and it spouts out the top and water falls off the edge of this. Well, it looks like just a plateau, a cut off plateau. And it's very fascinating because it's like the theory there would be that these were some kind of these river, ways would be like, uptake root systems that were carrying water up into the tree. And then when it cut off, that's what it is. You got left over, because like, how is water being pressurized to come up through this system? It's very questionable.
Well, that's the interesting part about this topic is, let's just say, okay, let's for 1 second just say for sure those were actual trees. That leads to lots more questions of, like, if these organic things turn to stone somehow, and obviously it's some kind of different process than like fossilization, because, like, all right, they weren't buried rapidly or anything like that, so like they're literally, first of all, the real question would be like, all right, we don't see any intact ancient trees, we see stumps. So the first question would be, all right, who chopped those trees down? What did they use? Was that a giant axe? I mean, like, so that's the first question. The second question is, how did they turn to stone? And then if they are stone, is it possible that some of the other mountain structures that we just assume are normal mountains, are they normal mountains too? Or were they actually organic material at a time too? Like,
It's a very fascinating question. I mean, should we start off with some of the understanding that's out there? Because there's something here in the Dead Sea Scrolls that I could bring up right here.
well, yeah, I guess we'll start with that. I think a lot of people have seen the videos circulating on social media saying, "Hey, look
Mm-hmm.
at these things. They look a lot like trees." And the one I point to a lot is that one of the first ones I discovered was, think about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was focused around this place in Wyoming, the Devil's Tower. And
Mm-hmm.
isn't that an interesting name for this thing? And it looks just like a tree stump. I mean, like, it's so bizarre. It looks like a tree stump. And in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the aliens were going to land their spaceship there, and then, like, the government of the world was trying to make contact with them there. So that kind of stuff, like, I think a lot of people are like, I mean, anecdotally, yes, it looks like a tree, but believe it or not, there's a lot to that, at least even biblically, and obviously extra biblically, when it comes to, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, as Bryan said, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Bryan, why don't you go, let us know what that says.
Yeah, and it's interesting that point, the Devil's Peak or the Devil's Tower or whatever. What is more fascinating is the archaeological structures that come up through the ground. There's these hexagonal rock formations that kind of push out from there. That supposedly the ground pushed them up, and they just came up from some weird anomalous ground, whatever. But those hexagonal shapes that those rocks come out in are very reminiscent of cell structures. They're very reminiscent
Mm-hmm.
of cellular, the way cells function and look, and it's very questionable and fascinating. And there's one other dude I'd also want to mention. I don't know if I can find the video, but the guy was looking at some of those giant trees, and around him, he was looking at the mountain ranges, and he compared the mountain ranges to a maple leaf. And it looked exactly like a maple leaf. Like, I'm not even, like, all of them. It looked like a bunch of maple leaves laying around one of those giant trees. And if I find a video, I'll send it to you. But it was fascinating watching what he was finding, just looking at the mountain ranges themselves around one of these giant trees.
Well, it's interesting just to say, like, let's say, let's play devil's advocate. Isn't it kind of interesting, like that, like the Freemasons and all these people would believe in sacred geometry, and that's this geometry that's like in everything. So, like, maybe some of these things weren't necessarily what they look like, but it's more like there is these repeating geometric shapes in
like the Fibonacci sequence,
in God's creation, that could also be it. So so everything that we see might not necessarily be, oh, well, that little thing has got to be this giant thing because they're the same. We got to have more than that. But I mean, that is interesting. And anecdotally, from my own experience, my wife and I, before we were married, we started doing all these hiking excursions, and we went to the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. And, I started to become fascinated with that. And she has as well, that like just weird rock structures. Like, that's weird. That doesn't look normal. Doesn't look like wind or water did that. Like, how did that happen? And we literally came upon this place that it looked like a bunch of trees bundled together, and they like fell over, because you could see like when you saw the bottom, and they were stone, they were rock, and they all looked like, you could see, they look like trees, and they almost looked like they had rings on the inside of them.
Wow.
And I want to say that the geologist said they were like lava or something like that, but you're like, it doesn't, but it looks like, I mean, it literally looked like a ton of trees stitched together, and they all fell over, and you could just see the bottoms. I mean,
I love the scientific explanation. I know it looks like that, but listen, guys, let's be a little bit, it just looks like that. There's a better explanation.
Here's the science explanation. Blah, 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 millions and millions of years ago. Yeah, exactly. And then also, don't believe your lying eyes. That's exactly what they try to say.
Yeah, for real. It's like when you just observe it with your own eyes, you're kind of like, that's questionable. It's like, wake up, people. Look what's right in front of you. That's what I want to tell people so many times.
Yeah, when you ever say, like, I remember my buddy VOR, Luke from Voice of Reason on TikTok and YouTube. He's going to be on the podcast soon. And it's funny because I remember one time he had like, I don't know if you remember Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he was like doing Mystery Science Theater 3000 on some kind of science video. The word where they all scream every time was millions and millions of years.
Today's secret word is millions of years. You all remember what to do whenever anyone says the secret word, right? Scream! Right!
When you watch one of those videos, it's always like
millions of years ago.
Everything seems plausible scientifically if you say apply enough time, and then it's like, we don't even have to worry about what's in the middle.
The funny part is it's not actually plausible. Time is not plausible, but it's like, well, I guess you could say it's plausible, but it's not probable. That's the thing. And that's the irony of the situation, because it's like you slap on the millions and millions of years and people go, oh yeah, of course, millions of years. But the reality is, if you shake a bag with broken watch parts in it for millions and millions of years, that watch is not going to put itself back together. And it'd be completely absurd. And it's funny that we take that as like science, and we're like, yeah, millions and millions of years.
Well, that's the funny thing about it. It's almost like the antithesis of science, because that is not actually something you can experiment on. It's not actually repeatable.
Yeah.
The fact that it's like, well, just trust us. Like, obviously we couldn't repeat a million years in the lab, but like that's
science.
That's just the way it happens. And look at this white coat. What's white coat that says scientists on it?
All right. So here's the interesting part, guys. Let's just talk about what these trees could possibly be, if they are trees, And so they obviously look like trees. The plateaus look like trees. The mountain range things look like trees. Some stuff looks like giant leaves. There's a lot of stuff that looks like giant trees. It's all over the place. And there's an interesting component in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you guys want to get a cool book, this book will, like, man, it'll change your perspective on a lot of things. It's so fascinating, the stuff you find in this book. I found a verse 3, I believe. It's called the Book of Giants. Okay. K4, 4Q.
Now, so is the Book of Giants, Bryan, is that in Enoch? Is that a part of Enoch?
It is kind of, but it's kind of like questionable. It is like the third Enoch, I believe, is what it's referred to, but it does have a lot of stuff that's very questionable, and don't take everything too serious when you're reading it. Just like read it with a grain of understanding that there could be a lot of corruption. Okay, there could be a lot of corruption in this text. We're not fully certain, but it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is fascinating, and it kind of alludes to some interesting texts because, again, this is the oldest writing system that the oldest writing verification of the Bible that we have is basically the Dead Sea Scrolls that verifies so much of the text that we have. There is some older texts that we have found, but they're like very few and far between.
Yeah, and by the way, so like what the Dead Sea Scrolls would typically be would be Second Temple books, and whether you want to say that they're canon or canonical, it likely means that the people of the Second Temple believed that they were legit. Yeah. And obviously it helped shape their worldview. And I think that's the thing that Michael Heiser talks about. It's like these things were all in scrolls. They weren't in a big book. And people read all of them. So obviously if they were in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was likely that the apostles and all these other people believed this stuff. So did everything they believe, was it necessarily true? It's like, well, I don't know. But it did help shape their worldview. And I think that, I think that's worth noting.
Yep, absolutely. And it's very fascinating, the stuff you find in here. I'm just going to go ahead and read this. It says, on the table, the evidence of the giants, and on the other table, blank, like the hurricane, and flew with the hands like an eagle, provided the wings, blank. There's a lot of missing parts in these, so I'll say blank a lot. The earth and crossed desolation, the great desert, blank. And saw Enoch, he called him and said to him, an oracle, blank, here. For a second time, I beg you for an oracle. Your words together with the Nephilim of the earth, if he removes, blank, from the days of their blank, and may they be punished. And here's where it gets kind of weird and interesting. So we know its explanation from you, blank. Then said Enoch, 200 trees which have come from heaven, blank, and the rest of the text is missing. I mean, I know this is really broken up and it's really like broken apart, but it's alluding here that Enoch is referring to the 200 trees which have come from heaven. There's an association with the trees from heaven to the trees of the Nephilim. Okay. There's some connection with these giant trees and some connection with the Nephilim. And there's other texts. There's another text here. I can't seem to find it right now, but there's another text that talks about, I believe, judgment coming, and that the trees were to be hewn down. They were to be, felled. So it's kind of a interesting sort of connection that these trees are referring to some type of Nephilim lineage, basically. And there's like an association with it. And then we have this text in the Bible where, was it Nebuchadnezzar that had the dream?
Yeah, I can go right into it where it says,
for it.
I got that pulled up. And so in the book of Daniel, and obviously this is a dream, and obviously it's regarding Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, there's no real reason to believe he was a Nephilim, but I mean, maybe he was because he had that kingly lineage. I mean,
I think all the king people might. Yeah,
so maybe somewhat. Obviously he does. Maybe he does actually have some. It is interesting that Nebuchadnezzar gets turned into a beast at a part in the Bible.
Oh, absolutely.
And that was a judgment of the Watchers, which is he's almost described like a werewolf. Very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's for another day, though.
Yeah.
My Lord, may the dream be for those who hate you and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that its tops reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruitful abundant, in which there was good food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and those whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is for you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reached the heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because of the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and its roots on the earth, bound it with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with dew of heaven, and let the portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over it. And this is the interpretation. So we'll go into that. But that's actually the verse where it actually talks about that his tree gets chopped. This tree gets chopped down. The tree was up to heaven. I mean, obviously, it is a dream, but obviously, it means something. So it was up to tree. Then a watcher, and so it's funny, Brian. I'm sure you encounter this a lot. Watcher's not in the Bible. That's an Enoch thing. And you're like, no, obviously, I just read it straight out of
people try to say that
out of the book of Daniel. And so then he's like, so Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom's basically going to be taken from him for a time, but he's going to bind up the stump and he's going to let him kind of like come back. What I always find very interesting about Nebuchadnezzar, if I can go on a little sidetrack with here, it's like that Nebuchadnezzar is not good, but I believe he finds redemption at the end because like he does repent at the very end. And it's like God did use him. He didn't humble. He was very prideful, and then God humbled him by basically turning him into a beast, like a straight up werewolf. Which again, cryptid stuff.
His nails
crazy.
grew long.
Yeah, his hair was like as long as his hair grew as long as like eagle's feathers. That's pretty long, right?
Yeah.
His fingernails were really long.
Did it say there was hair all over his body or just hair on his head? I just remember it said there was fingernails.
We're right here. Obviously, we should read it. And it said,
read it.
he was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. Some people think he turned into an ox because he ate like an ox, but it doesn't say that. It says he just ate like an ox. But his hair was as long as eagle feathers, which I imagine would have been like, somewhere like, I don't know, like
probably as long as my hair, at least
4 to 6 inches, and like
eagle's feathers. No, the eagle's feathers are like they're like 12 inches, bro.
Okay, well maybe so long hair, and then he had in his nails were like eagles, like birds' talons and stuff like that. I mean, like that is insane, but I mean, like that is in your Bible, right? Like, I mean, because he had this dream, so it's interesting. Like, so he had this part of the dream that's crazy. It was a tree that grew up to heaven, but then the second part's even more insane. The fact that he turned into like an animal, basically a wild animal. Point being is obviously that's a very clear story in the Bible, whether metaphorical, allegorical, that this tree was up to heaven, it got chopped down, and the only stump was left.
And it's interesting because it's associating that it turns into iron and stone or whatever. So obviously the tree gets turned into something, right? And so
it's clamped with a bronze clamp.
Whatever that means. But that would imply that it got turned into bronze or some kind of stone related thing became of it. And this is where it gets really even more interesting. So like the tree, I think this is an allegory referring to the time at which God sent the fallen angels down to hew down the trees. I believe what the verse said in the
what it said was a band of iron and bronze.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I believe what it says in the Qumran text, some of the Dead Sea texts that I was finding, I believe if I recall correctly, it says something according to the lines of chop down the trees so that the giants cannot climb above them when the floodwaters come. That was actually some
interesting.
Yeah, really interesting component that it was like the angel of the Lord was sent down to chop down the trees so that way the giants couldn't climb them. So that way God could bring the flood. And it's like, and the roots of the trees are the plateaus that we see all over the world. And so apparently there was these giant trees everywhere that were cut down so the giants couldn't escape the floodwaters or whatever. But here's the even more fascinating, like the trees seeing these sort of like components of leftover, they look like trees. There's rings on some of these plateaus, just like tree rings, and some of them look corroded, just like bark. It looks like bark on the outside of the mountain edge, but it looks like exactly like what you would see a tree is. Now, again, it could just be a mere reflection, but the fact that we got this story in the Bible and we got this other text in the Qumran text, there's something here. And what gets even more interesting, I find, is when you come into the understanding of the elite groups of individuals that rule the world, that talk about trees, okay? Specifically when it comes to Rothschild, okay? Rothschild, if you don't know, is one of the leading controllers of the world, one of the leading groups, along with, Rothschild in Japan. There's another group of people called Lee, And then there's another group of people called the Rockefellers. Okay. Now, we're not allowed to talk about the Lee people. Apparently, people talk about the Lee people go missing, but whatever. But I will tell you that the Lee clan of people that talk about this, their symbol for how you write Lee is child. It's the symbol for child, the Japanese symbol for child, or Chinese, ancient Chinese, and the symbol for tree. So it's tree child. That's how you write the symbol in Japanese. Tree child, which Rothschild, Roth is the word for wood. So wood child. Rothschild is wood child. So, you see these elite groups, naming themselves in association or connection to trees or child of tree, children of tree. Rockefeller, feller is a person who hews down a tree. Rockefeller. Rocka is another term of saying you're an idiot. So saying like Rockefellers, I don't know, the idiots who chop down the trees or something. I don't know what it also could mean giant, and it could also mean a few other things. Rocka can mean multiple things, but feller means somebody that cuts down a tree. So why are the elite groups of individuals having names associated with trees? And I think you have
It should be noted that like the Rothschilds, like that, their name has changed over their family history at least two times.
Yeah.
So it was like, I think it was Orsini, and I'm not sure what it was. I think maybe Orsini was the first one, and then the name changed to, forgot, it was obviously something before they converted to probably Kabbalah, and then they changed their name again. But yeah, like their name has changed before. So like, yeah, when people say, oh, well, they didn't know what their name was, it's like, no, they actually changed their name to that.
Yeah. So it's fascinating, but I think there is something to do with the controllers of the world in connection and conjunction with trees and understanding of trees. And I think you had an understanding with that you talked about in a video, or if you released it yet, your video.
Right. I wanted to make one quick note though. What was interesting in the text was 200 trees. So if you guys are familiar with the book of Enoch, there was 200 watchers that came down to Mount Hermon who made the pact with deciding to do the deed with the women and create the Nephilim. So it's like, I mean, it does make sense that there was 200 trees that were going to be likely chopped down and eliminated when you think about like, and obviously if it's related directly to the Nephilim, it's likely, that like their sons were going to be like, just like Nebuchadnezzar, he had this beautiful tree that reached to heaven. Everything was going to be in the shade of this tree. Well, obviously, when God pronounced judgment on the watchers, it likely was those trees were chopped down, and it was like all these things were going to happen. And it does make sense that like that these giant trees would have only been able to probably grow that high and be like that before the flood, antediluvian stuff, crazy stuff, maybe like the megafauna, megaflora, all that kind of stuff. But perhaps they were just more of a spiritual thing, because I made this video just recently, and I talked about this, actually not just recently, I just released it just tonight, and it was about Ixarel. And so Ixarel is the world tree in the Norse mythology. It's very fascinating. Like the Norse mythology has a world tree, and if you look it up, it's actually equivalent to like the tree of knowledge. It's not the tree of life, it's the tree of knowledge. Just like think Adam and Eve, the tree that they weren't supposed to eat from. And so this tree goes up to heaven, and then in Norse mythology, it has like the nine different realms. And then there's an underworld part of the tree where like literally there's like a serpent at the roots. The bottom part of the tree is called the Nephilim. That's part.
Niflheim.
Yeah, Niflheim. I mean, you're like, this is the underworld.
Sounds a whole lot like Niflheim.
There's a Helheim down there, and it's like people don't leave Helheim when they go there. Niflheim or Niflheim. It's like it's very clearly like this is I think it's like frosty place in the underworld that has like these giants down there.
Absolutely. Well, that's what they're called, frost giants too.
Right, and it's interesting. It's like this is the kind of stuff that we're just like this stuff. It's all connected because it's all one big story. So then I made a connection this pretty wild night in my video. And of course, like I said, before you say you're reaching, bro, I know I'm probably reaching, but maybe I'm not, doesn't mean I'm not right. Is that I made this connection where I was looking at the German parliament building, and I was doing videos last year, probably about this time last year, about the Senegal, West Africa. They have this UN building that looks like a hurricane. It literally looks like the hurricane symbol that you would see, like whatever the National Weather Service when they're just showing a symbol for a hurricane. That's what the building looks like. So I was saying, and I did some digging, and I said, that's where this hurricanes come from. It just happens to be in Senegal, West Africa. So then I thought, maybe there's more things like that. And I found this building, the German Reichstag building, which actually burned down, and like Hitler blamed the Jews for burning it down, and that's one of the big false flags before World War II. And so this building, very old, super kind of like Tatarian looking structure, crazy looking, awesome building. Well, they renovated it in the late 90s, and they added this weird dome, and they added this weird architectural feature that I was like, that looks like a tornado. And that was my first understanding, because I guess I was looking at like weather modification. Do the Germans have a tornado machine? Maybe. I haven't ruled that out yet, but but the more I looked at it, the shape of the dome and the way it kind of like went into like the bottom floor where their parliament met, I guess this is maybe just something about me. I don't know. Maybe it's a gift. Maybe it's a curse. I was like, that dome looks weird. That structure looks weird. And for some reason, I had seen the picture of Israel, like the whole dome, so obviously in their view of the cosmos, they believed in a firmament. Mm-hmm. They believe a tree that went up to the firmament, and the tree kind of sprouted out around. Mm-hmm. And then they believed in Midgard, was kind of like where we would be living. And then there was an underworld where the tree went down. I overlaid the two. They fit exactly. It's so, like I said, it's so freaky, like that could be something like that. But the shape of the dome is an odd shape. That's kind of what made me like, that was the clue for me. And so if you think about it, I know you talked about it, Bryan, about like, the bad Germans from the 30s and how they had their symbols on their SS. And some of the symbols had something to do with Norse mythology.
Yep, sure did. In fact, they even had Thor was on one of the SS rings. It's Thor.
Right.
You can look it up, guys, and everybody's all, oh, I love Thor. I love superheroes, bro. You have no clue. You have no clue what you're worshiping, okay?
Right.
Because Thor was an entity they really believed in, and the SS people, the Germans from the 30s, really worshipped Thor in a whole nother level that you don't even know about.
Right. So it's fitting that the people in Germania or whatever it would probably have been back in those days, like that. Or it might have been Ashkenaz is what it was.
Yeah, like, it was Ashkenaz. That's what it was.
Yeah,
for sure.
So
they named it Ashkenaz.
Yeah, so they believed in and they probably believed in that Norse mythology. So it makes sense that they would still be putting the symbols in there. And it's so funny, like that. I don't know if anybody else made that connection that I did, but I looked it up, and it's like, it's not so far fetched when you believe that. Yeah, like they actually do believe some of the Norse mythology, and to put a bigger picture on it, it's like, they're not the only people who believed in a world tree. So if there was more people who believed in a world tree, perhaps they believed in like 200 world trees around the world. And then you think about movies like Avatar, it's all about this sacred tree that, they get their life from. That is sort of an interesting concept, that like these trees literally represent angels. And then Bryan and I'll let you go from here. Is what I was making the connection with. I know spiritual entities, gods, are often related to mountains. So there's this connection between mountains, like heavens coming to the earth. So like you think about in like the Bible, it talks about the high places where sacrifices were done to gods. Typically, God's not Yahweh. The other gods were doing sacrifices on these high places. Okay, so we know those places to be mountains. Is it possible that some of the mountains that we know as mountains didn't used to be mountains? Maybe there's more structures that used to be trees, and then after time and after being chopped down, is it possible that these trees were more than just trees? Like there's the mythologies of like these giants and these trolls turning to stone. Is that also related to a tree turning to stone that's related to an angel? Is it possible, even like in the crazy, crappy Noah movie, that
The rock giants.
Literally, the angels, the fiery ones that came down, turned to stone.
Here's the interesting part, because there's a lot of Native Americans that talk about having stone giants or rock giants or hard giants. They're all called this. The giants were known for being like hard skinned or hard or
Yes.
somehow stone related, that they couldn't pierce them, and so they needed guns, and the guns blew their heads off. But and so the guns worked pretty well apparently against the rock giants. But either way, you know, if you don't have guns, you ain't gonna throw a spear through a rock, okay? So, you know, it's kind of like a interesting thing. There's a connection to stones and giants and rocks, and like trolls turning into stone when the light hits them, right?
Yeah.
There's the trolls that turn to stone. And you've got all these mythological stories. Medusa turns people's heads to stone, or turns people to stone with her head, right? And so there's all these associations with the Nephilim, or these mythological creatures turning things into stone. And we don't really fully understand or grasp the concept of what's really going on here, I don't think. But there is a connection that you can find in places all over the world where you see stone entryways. You'll see doorways that just look like stone, and there's like no walkthrough and stuff. And I've got to do a video on this here soon, but the talking about this in more detail. But the stone, there is a lot of stone relation to like these mythical creatures having the ability to manipulate stone, or to turn to stone, or turn other things to stone, and move stones, like the megalithic structures. Okay, they had some ability that came when it came to stone to manipulate it. Okay, there's a lot of associations to these giants or these entities, which are all Nephilim that we know of, that are had some ability to manipulate stone. And I find that very fascinating, especially when you look at things like the trees that have like now turned to stone. Maybe that's just like a thing that happens over time, and it petrifies really fast, and there's a lot of, you know, minerals present. And maybe if something's decaying and it doesn't get eaten because there's so much genetic like matter there, then it default turns to stone or something. Who knows?
There's a lot of things going on with the stone that I don't get. I mean, I don't get when you actually think about it. Okay, so another example of rock giants or earth giants. If you guys are familiar with Frozen 2, and you probably aren't, but if you have kids, you probably there's giants. They're called earth giants in Frozen 2, and they are rock monsters.
Wow.
They are one of the 4 elemental spirits is rock giants. That's strange. Just think about biblically, even like you have like, so Moses hits the rock and water comes out of it. That's weird. There's example of like Laban and Jacob making a pact, and they pile up stones. There's examples of in the Bible often that like they pile up stones to remember things. And then even think about like that Jesus says, even if everybody else wasn't saying Hosanna, the rocks would cry out. And you're just like, okay, so like those kind of examples, I mean, obviously it's just like there's something more to these stones than maybe we realize, our understanding of what's happening. But like, yeah, you're right. Like there's so many mythologies of things turning to stone. And obviously we know things turn to stone because they're obviously petrified trees that are not maybe necessarily the science would agree on the trees turn to stone somehow. I don't necessarily get how that works. And then you literally have other things that like fossils turning to stone. Mm-hmm. So like, you know, like bone, like organic matter can turn to stone.
Well, things turn to stone a lot faster than people think. In fact, I have a friend who has a piece of pipe that they've cut, and inside the pipe, because the water was so rich in minerals, it had turned the pipe into stone, and so the pipe itself had become stone. So they've like sliced this piece of pipe with rock stone straight through it, and you can get their little ring slices of this pipe that they found where it was highly mineralized water has basically stoned the pipes that they installed. And so it's like they've turned them to stone. And so there's no arguing that stone can happen really fast. In fact, there's a lot of things that have turned to stone. I think there's a truck somewhere in some kind of an Amazonian environment where the truck had turned to stone, or some parts of it had turned to stone. People have found spark plugs in stone, and it's like the spark plug is partially turned to stone. And it's like, well, clearly if it's a spark plug for a truck, why is it turned to stone? There's a bunch of different things that we realize that stone can happen under certain circumstances and certain environmental circumstances, that it can happen a whole lot faster than we suspect.
Yeah, I guess there's just a lot there. So at the end of the day, Bryan, do you think that those mountains are Do you think they were trees?
Oh, I can't answer that question directly, but I got like a good. My perception would be that if I had a little bit more evidence, I'm gonna say yes, but I'm leaning towards the yes that they were trees at one point. I just got to find enough evidence to prove it or enough scriptures to back it up for me to 100% say yes. But as of right now, I'm definitely leaning towards yeah. I think they probably were trees, especially if there's 200. I would love someone out there to count how many plateaus mountains there are in the world and then like make a geographical pinpoint on all of them and see if there's 200. Because there's 200, I'm definitely being like, all right, cool. Those were trees. Those were trees.
Yeah, I think that they were trees. I think some of those ones. I don't think that all of them were, but I mean, I guess that's the thing is like we, like you just think about how quickly history can be forgotten, and obviously things that happened before the flood, and it's like we can't even imagine like a world with giants and giant
Mhm.
trees and giant monsters running around, like who knows, like cryptids and everything. But it's kind of like, is that really that crazy that there was a big tree? I mean, not really. I mean, I guess it said obviously we haven't seen one, but I mean, like what's interesting is I had a friend on TikTok post a video showing like I think it's a structure. Maybe is that in Utah or is that Arizona, where it looks like an axe that's
Yeah.
attached to what could have been a tree. I mean, was it an axe? I mean, that's weird. But I mean, like, I don't know. I guess the things are like these are fun things to speculate
It's a
about.
very
But I mean,
strange stone structure. Let's just put it that way.
I guess that's the one thing. And actually, to give you spoilers for a future episode, we're going to do is like I think Bryan. So as I mentioned before, I was hanging out with Bryan in Las Vegas, and we went to a place called uh, a Valley Fire. And as I've been fascinated with that, is like these rock structures that geologically the explanations are unsatisfying, and that's where kind of like what is this stuff. And so I'm going to bring on my buddy Vitali from Alpha Talks on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and we're going to talk about like the possibility that these things were possibly caused by the judgment of God. And what's interesting to me, to go back to the trees, is isn't it kind of funny just the way that the day of the Lord's described, that the mountains are going to melt like wax. Like even Jesus saying, if you have faith, you could tell that one mountain to go from here and
Oh yeah.
cast it into the sea. And it's like it's almost like so the mountains are going to melt like wax. The islands are going to be removed from their places, and it's almost like why is God going to melt the mountains that He created unless the mountains there's more to that story.
Yeah,
You know,
could
because
be.
like God doesn't have to destroy His own creation if He doesn't want to. It's like, but maybe the mountains, maybe there's more to those mountains, and maybe those mountains actually are old trees.
Or like the Himalayan salt, where people think it looks like the meat. I've seen that, or the Himalayan salt mines, where they just look like they're like, oh, this could be the meat substance of the Nephilim, their dead bodies.
Right, or the mud fossil things that people talk about, like
Yeah.
that this was actually like some of these mountains actually look like have faces and stuff, and then some of them look like
I think I gotta say the face thing, guys. I think is a little absurd. I gotta say that because they did a study on the human mind's ability to recognize faces, and some ridiculous like absurd like we can recognize faces like beyond like anything very easily. And so it's like we see faces in everything, especially if anything's mirrored or reflected looking. So
I agree with that. That's
I
true.
think if it is going to be a face, it's going to look like a sunken in, like rotted face. You know what I mean? It's not going to be like perfectly like have like fat and tissue on it or whatever. And so people
Unless it was turned to stone when it was not
instantly.
decayed.
There is one thing that I've seen that looks like snake scales, and it is one rock formation that I've seen. It looks like a snake. It's a massive rock formation. It winds and it looks like snake scales. Now I don't know if somebody went through hundreds of years ago and carved those scales into that rock formation, but because it definitely looks like snake scales. And it just looks like alligator, giant snake skin. And I think it's got like a part where it almost looks like its head. It looks like a giant snake had been turned to stone. It's very
Well,
fascinating.
that you say that too. That one thing that should not actually be ruled out is the fact that when you see like some of the structures like in India and like Indonesia and like think like Petra, where like the ancients like carved stuff straight out of mountains, it's
Mhm.
not beyond the possibility that they literally carved a mountain to look like something, and then
Yeah.
eventually it got degraded in some kind of way, because they could obviously manipulate stone like we can't. So
Yeah.
maybe they made a dragon out of something that looked like a mountain. Obviously, we have
Who
Mount
knows?
Rushmore, you know. So it's kind of like if Mount Rushmore just had the wrath of God poured down on it. It's like that looked like a couple faces up there, and something. Oh, you're reaching, bro. It's like, well, they were carved in there. They weren't literally giants that were in that mountain, but like
Yeah.
they were faces. So like, I guess the point is like we have no idea what happened to
No,
Long John.
we don't have any idea.
It is fun to speculate about, but it was funny actually in the comments of my video. Somebody was saying like, so a lot of people would say that's crazy to think that those things were big trees. Well, allow me to get even crazier from what my comment section said, that actually those aren't trees; those are actually the ankles of a giant. And I was like, but there's only one. Where's the other leg at?
Where's the other ankle?
I was like, you know, like I was going a little far. I was going out on the limb to believe that was a tree, and now you're saying it was actually part of a leg, and I'm like,
no,
I don't know. I think the tree seems more plausible to me.
the tree concept definitely seems way more plausible.
But on the other side, what did they say? Like, is it in Enoch that says that the giants were 3,000 ells?
Yeah, it does say that in Enoch,
and that is weird. That is weird.
I've always wondered about that. I've always wondered about that verse, and I'm like, dude, is that a mistranslation? Is that whatever? But apparently, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it still says 3,000. So if that was a mistranslation, it's been there for a real long time. So I don't know.
And what is an L? Is an L bigger than a cubit or the same size as
like roughly? I think it's roughly about the same size, so about 3 feet an L.
Well, no, a cubit was like 16 inches, like 18 inches, yeah, something like that, 16, 18 inches. So you're talking about you're talking really big, really big. Like really big. So like we're talking about like not 20-foot giants. We're talking about like, what is that? I mean, we're talking about like 4,500 feet or something like that.
Yeah,
some stupid like that. I mean,
it seems ridiculous to me, but you know, who knows? I mean. Maybe that was just there crazy time. We just don't know.
Well, God did decide to destroy the whole earth, so it was as bad as you could possibly. It could be as bad as you could possibly imagine.
All right.
But anyways, Bryan, you got it. You got anything else?
That's it, man.
Well, yeah, guys. So anyways, I hope you guys appreciate this episode. If you guys have not liked and subscribed and shared and all that kind of stuff, please hit the notification bell, subscribe, do all the things. Hey, Ancient Angels, guys, obviously this is the kind of topic that will eventually get put in there, where we're going to have to like deep dive into the giant trees and the relation to the angels and the Nephilim. So you guys have not seen Ancient Angels, once again, ancientangelsmovie.com. Follow Bryan on TikTok and Instagram, myself on Instagram as well. And that's where you find most of our kind of current stuff. But yeah, guys, we appreciate your support. We love you guys. God bless you. See you next time.
Bye.